Hello, my name is Tom and welcome to my channel. This is going to be the first of two videos of me talking about the Buzzword Reading Challenge. So this video I'm going to be talking about this year's reading challenge and what I've read, and then my next video will be talking about what I'm planning to read next year. So for those of you who don't know, the Buzzword Reading Challenge is the current version of the BuzzWordathon, which is run by Kayla from Books and Lala, whose channel I'll link in the description. And the premise is that each month there is a prompt that is to do with the title of the book, and then that book is added to your TBR for that month. So I'm going to talk about the 2021 books that I read for this challenge. So excuse me looking down because I've got some notes. So in January, the book prompt was the word dream, and I only had one book with the word dream in the title. So I read Dream Date by Sinclair Smith. This book cover is going to be really reflective, isn't it? I'm going to put it down. So Dream Date is a point horror book, so it's YA horror. Let me just check the date. 1993. So I have it because I've got a small collection of point horror books, the vintage paperbacks. I just really like the covers, and again, it's a shame that this one is so reflective that you can't really see it, can you? No. In Dream Date, we follow Kate, who one night meets her dream boyfriend in one of her dreams, and they build a relationship in this dream world until Kate meets the boy of her dreams in real life, and her dream dates start to turn into nightmares. So there are Nightmare on Elm Street vibes in this book, but it's nowhere near as high caliber. It's very easy reading, it's very young YA. I had a good time, but it's not the most impactful book. So the prompt for February was a colour, and I read The Black Spider by, excuse my pronunciation, Jeremias Gotthelf. Gotthelf? Jeremias Gotthelf. This is a really interesting book. It's a classic horror. Let me find out who translated it. Translated by H.M. Waitson. This book is really old for horror. The author passed away in 1854. I'm not sure exactly when the original text was published. But he was a Swiss pastor, and he wrote horror fiction with sort of a Christian angle. So there's a lot of fear of sin, a lot of fear of Satan in his books. But unlike other Christian horror, Christian thriller, there's no sort of swooping in of the godly to save the day. This is just a very upsetting ending. I really enjoyed this book, not for those with arachnophobia, and because of the translation, it was really easy to read. One thing to note is that there are no chapter breaks in this book. It is 109 pages, but it is a single stream. So the narrator is it's a story told by a character in the book. It's a little bit weird, it's a little bit of getting your head around it, but I did really enjoy this book. The prompt for March was the word time. So I read Timequake by Kurt Vonnegut. I like Kurt Vonnegut, even though I have no idea how to pronounce his surname. He is a very surreal author. Lots of self-insert fiction, lots of characters that appear in several of his books, even though the stories aren't related. And this is one of those odd ones. Timequake is set out like a memoir. It's self-insert fiction, but it is about a timequake, which is an event where everyone is kicked back 10 years in their own life. So they're living the same 10 years over again without any agency. So they know what's happening, they're aware, but they can't change anything. It's a very interesting book. I would recommend reading one of Vonnegut's more popular books first in order to see if you like his writing, because it's a very specific style. But I really enjoyed this book. I love the premise. The premise is bizarre. The prompt for April was space words. So I read Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alire Sáenz. By Benjamin Alire Sáenz. I'm sorry, I have never done any Spanish in my life. I was really excited to read this book. I have heard so many good things about it, and I had such a nice time reading it. That being said, when I was thinking about talking about this book, I realised how much of it didn't really stick with me. So we're following Ari and Dante, who are both Mexican Americans, if I remember correctly, and Dante can swim, but Ari can't, and they meet, and Dante teaches Aristotle how to swim. And it's basically about their relationship and how it grows. It was a very easy read. I read it quite quickly, very pleasant. But again, I don't have any specifics that stick out. It was just a positive experience reading this book. The prompt for May was house or home, so I read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I haven't read any of Leigh Bardugo's other books. I haven't read Shadow and Bone, but I really enjoyed this book. We have a university setting, or a college setting in America. Which one is it? It's Yale. And we have high magic societies full of students. So it's a trope that I quite like. We have very formal high magic being performed by people who are somewhat inept in some ways. And we follow Alex, or Galaxy, and she is sent to Yale on a scholarship on the condition that she joins one of these societies, and it's the Ninth House. It's the house that is in charge of policing the magic of the other houses. Very good premise. There was a nice balance of somewhat thrillery elements and somewhat comedy elements. And yeah, I think this would be a good book for people who who like murder mysteries but are looking for maybe a hint of urban fantasy in their reading. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. For June, the prompt was names and titles, so I read The 5 Stages of Andrew Brawley by Shaun David Hutchinson, not Hutchinson. Shaun David Hutchinson. I enjoyed this book, but not as much as, say, Aristotle and Dante. It's another LGBT book, and it follows the titular character who has survived an accident that has killed the rest of his family, but he's decided to stay in the hospital. So he's disappeared and is living in a construction site in the hospital, and he's got a job in the cafeteria, and he's staying very under the radar until a boy named Rusty ends up in the ER, and he sees him in there and strives to befriend him. To quote the back of the book, his agony calls out to Drew like a beacon, pulling them together through all their pain and grief. There is a very strange element in this book, which is how Andrew perceives death as stalking him. It's very strange. It took me a long time to sort of understand what was happening there. And another nice feature, we have a little bit of multimedia in this book. Andrew is writing a comic, or drawing a comic, sorry, whilst he's hiding out in the hospital. We get snippets of that, which is quite nice. The prompt for July was the word last, so I read One Last Thing Before I Go by Jonathan Tropper. Unfortunately, this was my only DNF for this challenge. I got to page 76 when I put it down. The premise is really interesting. We have our main character Silver, who is 44, divorced and not exactly living the dream. Silver essentially gets diagnosed with a fatal condition and decides to try and fix his life in the time that he has left. He tries to reconcile with his pregnant daughter. He wants to be a better man and he wants to fall in love. The problem that I had with this book, which is the thing that ultimately made me put it down, is that it's very male-gazy, I think is the term. There are lots of passages which is just our character looking at a woman and the description of that. And I get that as a character element, but when it's a whole page, I don't really have time for that. It's not my cup of tea. The prompt for August was A Time of Day, so I read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I liked this book and I listened to the audiobook, which I'd also recommend. The premise is so interesting. We follow Nora, who ends up in a place called the Midnight Library on the night that she dies. And in the Midnight Library, she is given the opportunity to live other lives, to live lives where she's made different decisions in an attempt to undo some of her regrets. I was worried about reading this book because it does talk about suicide, but I didn't find it as upsetting as I have found other books on the topic. It was really quite a gentle read. It's quite kind and very tactful, I would say. And the sort of magical, supernatural element in the Midnight Library and how that works, it was just a really nice idea to read about. The prompt for September was the word dark, so I read Skulduggery Pleasant Dark Days by Derek Landy. Now, this is a book that I've DNF'd before. I believe I put it down to pick up the Hunger Games and then just never went back to it. The Skulduggery Pleasant saga is very important to me. I own all of them. However, this is book 4 and this is the last book that I've read. I loved this book. I absolutely loved it. I won't tell you about this book because it is a sequel, but the Skulduggery Pleasant world in general, we're following Stephanie, whose uncle has passed away recently, and she meets someone at his funeral who turns out to be Skulduggery Pleasant, the skeleton detective. And the saga is about Stephanie entering the magical world and learning how it works and experiencing some of the horrific things that are happening. It is a middle grade series. I believe the first book is marked 11+, this book is marked as 9+. I have never read a Skulduggery Pleasant book that I haven't enjoyed, and I am looking forward to continuing with the series. The prompt for October was The Elements, so I read Journey to the Centre of the Earth by Jules Verne. This is a very well-known classic, and it deserves it, really. I did the classic thing of thinking I knew what the story was and then reading it and finding out that the story is different. It's nice and quick. I did switch over to the audiobook because in this particular edition the translation is a little bit difficult to read. I believe it's originally in German. But yeah, very interesting story. I love reading classics about science, and about how science was viewed and interpreted historically. There is a lot of talk about geographical theory and how people thought the Earth used to work, and then it goes into this adventure which is essentially period sci-fi, which is a really interesting concept. But yeah, a bit of a dense read, even though it is nice and short. Okay, the November prompt was the word lost. So I am reading The Lost Girls of Camp Forevermore by Kim Fu. So this is my current read, even though I am filming in December, so I'm running a little bit late on this book. I have 50 pages left, and this book was really not what I expected it to be. I picked it up on the misunderstanding that it was a thriller, and the first sort of 50-75 pages really had that sort of feeling, but that has gone away now, and continuing to read, I don't think that this is a thriller. This is literary fiction / contemporary, and it's exploring how childhood trauma affects the rest of your life, essentially. We start at Camp Forevermore, and we follow 5 girls who go on a camp out, and something horrible happens. And we then switch back and forth between their future perspectives and what's happening at Camp Forevermore. And it's sort of showing how what happened on this camp out has had a butterfly effect through their lives. The story of the first girl does have a few supernatural undertones, which is why I still thought it was sort of thrillery, horror-y. It's just started to hail, so I really hope you can't hear that. But yeah, it isn't. It is an exploration of these girls who suffered in their childhood and are going through quite traumatic lives, I suppose. And the prompt for December, which I will be reading this month, was day, month or season. So I was going to read the June Boys, but I have since found some reviews that have made me want to read it a bit less. So what I've decided to read is The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. Now, I lent this book to my granddad, and he really didn't like it. So I'm slightly worried to read this book, but also the back makes it look really quite fun. I'll read the back out to you. In a peaceful retirement village, 4 unlikely friends meet up once a week to investigate unsolved murders. But when brutal killing takes place on their very doorstep, the Thursday Murder Club find themselves in the middle of their first live case. Elizabeth, Joyce, Ibrahim and Ron might be pushing 80, but they still have a few tricks up their sleeves. I can't really say much more about this book until I've read it, but I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, so that is all 12 prompts. That is all the books that I read for the BuzzWord Reading Challenge this year. My next video I will be talking about my plans for the BuzzWord Reading Challenge next year. So if that interests you, if you'd like to watch that video, consider subscribing. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you next time.